A new poll shows majority of LGBTQ plus community think social media is harming democracy. About 2/3 of all Americans, 64%, say social media has a mostly negative effect on our democracy. Of that number, more than 80% of conservatives and Republicans believe our democracy is under attack from social media. But most disturbing of all is that as many as 54% of the liberal mindset of the LGBTQ plus community also believe our democracy is harmed by social media. This is the most negative number in the history of social media since the formation of the internet. The top reasons for this opinion by the poll is explained as misinformation, the hate and harassment they see on social media. They also have concerns about users believing everything they see or read or not being sure about what to believe. Additionally, they bemoan social media's role in fomenting partisanship, polarization, and the creation of echo chambers. Interestingly, the younger you are, the more optimistic you become about social media. An industry generating hundreds of billions of dollars is largely the Wild West. A huge issue is virtually no government regulation. The only real regulations comes from the Communications Decency Act, infamous Section 230, saying, quote, "No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider," end quote. Essentially, this means that social media platforms have no responsibility for the content on their platform. You do. While at first glance that is an embracement for free speech, it really is also an embracement that the government has done nothing in the 27 years that this law was passed. In the last century, before there were even any of today's major social media platforms. In fact, this law was passed when less than 20% of Americans had ever even been on the World Wide Web. The LGBTQ plus community is literally living in the Wild West online. This is not a new phenomenon, however. Up until the 1970s, doctors, medical doctors, did advertisements that smoking was good for you. Then the government had comprehensive safety warnings added, and an advertising policy changes were implemented against smoking that literally saved millions of lives. It happened again in the 1980s when no car required a seatbelt until laws occurred in 1986 to make them mandatory. It happened because studies proved the danger, and the federal government, despite car lobbies, took action. In this last year, there were more than 20 attempts have been made in Congress to regulate social media, and 100% have not even made it to the floor. The most common explanation as to why, according to experts, is the social media lobby. A final question on what is happening to the LGBTQ plus community is social media is the why. Just this week, Facebook insider and whistleblower Frances Hogan answered that question. Profits. Like tobacco in the 1960s and 70s and seatbelts in the 70s and 80s, it was not about safety, but rather about money. Hogan said, quote, "If Elon Musk wants Twitter to be a public square, he should make its algorithms open source," end quote. Translation: social media sites have every incentive to start the fight on your own feed, especially from the broad community against marginalized communities of LGBTQ+, people of color, religious minorities, and women. A like is not nearly as valuable as a dislike. Studies show angry emojis get 5 times the preference by algorithms because they are more likely to be clicked, and clicks generate advertising profits. Your anger against trans, drag queens, gay marriage, and children in schools are far more likely to be shared, and that makes money. So why today's poll results surprise us? We really should be surprised. The study is fascinating. We're not surprised that 80% of Republicans and conservatives think that the web is out for them, that social media is out for them. That we've heard that and heard that. What does catch us by surprise is the majority of LGBT and liberal-minded thinking also think that social media is bad for democracy.
Yeah.
It is breathtakingly, it brings us to a stop from the standpoint of, okay, now we're all basically agreed, not to the same number as the conservatives, but we're all agreeing to the same thing. We don't like social media. And then we spend 8 hours a day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can attest to that as an elected official because, you know, folks, my constituency tends to be more liberal by definition. And of course, they would be the first to pounce on the conservatives and say, how dare they do the echo chamber? They're just not thinking anything through. And then they do the exact same thing. Somebody will post their opinion, and rather than folks ask me whether that's truth or the case, they're echoing it and running with it, and it's frustrating.
I imagine, Jasmine, I turn to you. I imagine as a drag queen in today's environment, do you get much hate in social media, or are you living in a good enough bubble where it's a friendly environment for you?
I mean, I don't get really much hate outside from, you know, outside things. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen Hamburger Mary's. As a show director, I'm a part of all the accounts and stuff, so I do see some of the things that come through there. But for the most part, we are blessed at this point to not really experiencing a lot of that.
What do we do about this? The poll is also a reflection that the word phrasing here of the support is democracy. It's not that it's not selling our products, it's not selling our coffee mugs, it's not allowing me to reconnect with grandma. It is saying that it is damaging our democracy. And this is a phenomenon that we've seen that really seriously began in 2015 and 16, frankly, when Donald Trump ran for president, and all bets were off in terms of the way we would speak to each other. Yeah. It gave us permission to sit and do and say whatever we want. So if these are the facts, which they are in terms of what Americans and LGBT think, what do we do about it? Any thoughts of?
Yeah, so, you know, I think what was very startling in what you reported was the fact that 100% of the conversations in Congress did not make it to the floor. The fact that there are some initiatives to regulate the industry, but yet because of the lobby, it hasn't made it to the floor. It hasn't even made it to the floor to discuss, to the debate. And so we almost have to think about the role that lobbyists play in our democracy, right? And this is a long standing conversation of how do we limit the lobbyists in making policy, right? President Obama, when he was president, tried to limit the lobbyists, right? And their role and influence in public policy. However, we really need to re-bring those conversations back up about how do we limit lobbyists, right? To allow these conversations to be had on a Congress floor, because lobbyists are a powerful group, right? They have the resources that allow our elected officials to get elected, right? And so if they have that control, we will never make progress on regulating the industry. So we almost have to limit the role of lobbyists and their role in trying to bring forth this topic.
But how could you even limit them in the first place if they're giving the resources?
The limit is easy. People have to actually start participating in democracy themselves on a, at least a weekly basis. I mean, lobbyists, people get lazy. The electorate gets lazy. They don't want to do any research. They don't want to go to a community meeting. It's easier to just jump on social media and see what somebody else is saying and, oh, this must be fact. People could check lobbyists in an instant, but it means they'd have to do some work. This
is a story that I think in 2023, we're obviously early in the year. This is a story that we probably are going to talk about in many different inclinations all year long. Mm-hmm. As our situation, especially in LGBT, gets worse for drag queens, for parental right conversations and what's happening in our schools, and Governor DeSantis becomes bolder and bolder and bolder in the steps forward to 2024. I suspect we're going to be talking about this a lot. The last observation that I want to point out that I think is very interesting is Article 230 is really the only legislative control on the internet. Twitter can do, Facebook can do, Instagram can do, et cetera, and so on, what they do with impunity. They can't do this exact same responsibility that Fox News even has, or Newsmax has, or NBC, or MSNBC. They have responsibilities, at least in minimal standards, for libel. You do not on the internet. And this act is the reason why. Because before Facebook really launched, or Twitter launched, or et cetera and so on, this is the only guidance, federal law, which says you're not responsible for content. So if I have a page and Scott comes on and says something incredibly incendiary and libelous and an outright lie, that's okay, because I have no responsibility for it. And many argue that if federal laws amended 230 to say, wait, we're going to make internet news and information in the same platform standard as print journalism and television journalism, then things would begin to improve. But we can't even get that to the floor of Congress because the lobbyists that represent social media are spending so much time and influence that they prevent this. So they stir the fight and they keep the fight going. And why? That's what we're reporting on tonight. This reflects it's damaging democracy, and we believe it is damaging democracy. And why? Not for any greater good other than money. That's what we're learning. That's why we give the comparisons of smoking in the 70s and seatbelts for cars in the 80s. It seems to be a very similar situation and something that we must address.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Lara are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.